Good morning. I'm Dusky Terry, President of ITC Midwest. For the third straight year, we are pleased to be the presenting sponsor for the Iowa Ideas Conference and extraordinarily proud of our partnership with the Gazette. As an electric transmission company serving 2/3 of the state, ITC Midwest is invested in and has a very real stake in the future of Iowa. We've supported this conference since its inception because we embrace its mission of gathering hundreds of Iowans together to explore the key questions and the big ideas that will shape the future of our state. ITC Midwest was formed in 2007 to improve electric transmission reliability and increase transmission system capacity in Iowa. And we followed through on that commitment with more than $4.1 billion in capital investments to date. Our investments in the system not only serve the changing needs of customers, they also provide additional capacities to support economic growth and development of low-cost renewable energy resources. Our investments have resulted in a 62% drop in transmission-related outages since ITC acquired the system and began operating it. From extreme weather events such as last year's derecho to the unprecedented transition to renewable energy, from the rapid adoption of electric vehicles to the increasing focus on energy system resilience, the electric utility industry is suddenly in the national spotlight. All of these forces reinforce the critical role of the transmission grid to support the changing landscape and ensure consumers have access to low-cost, clean, and reliable electricity. You know, we often talk about here at ITC about the power of connection, meaning connections are needed to deliver power to communities. There's also tremendous power when people connect to solve problems. Over the next couple of days, I hope you will engage in the breakout sessions, speak up during discussions, and share your ideas to create a brighter future. Open your mind to different points of view as we all work together to come up with the best solutions for making Iowa an even better place now and in the future. I want to thank you for your participation to help shape the future and wish you a great conference.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Isabella Zaluska, and I'm the Gazette's local government reporter covering Iowa City and Johnson County. Today, I'll be moderating our discussion about electric vehicle infrastructure in Iowa. This session is part of the infrastructure track, and we'll be talking about the current state of electric vehicle infrastructure, as well as looking ahead to see what needs to happen to make these vehicles and infrastructure more accessible to Iowans. We have 4 really great panelists joining us today. And before we start the discussion, I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves by saying their name, organization, and talking a little about their current role and work with electric vehicles. I'm just going to go with the order that you all show up on my screen. And Matt, would you be able to start us off this morning?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. My name is Matt Ott. I'm with MidAmerican Energy. I am a project developer for the company. In my role, I help develop our renewable projects, our wind and solar, and then as well as our electric vehicle program, including rebates and fast charging.
Thanks, Matt. Daniel?
Hi, I'm Daniel Bissell. I am the Climate Action Analyst with the City of Iowa City. And part of my role is tracking the energy usage and greenhouse gas emissions throughout the City of Iowa City. And part of that is tracking the usage of our electric vehicle charging stations and our parking ramps.
MK?
Yeah, hi, I'm MK Anderson. I'm a project manager with the Iowa Energy Office. And as part of that role, I run the Iowa Clean Cities Coalition, which is a coalition that works to increase the use of alternative fuel in the state. And as part of that, I do education and outreach on electric vehicles.
And Brad.
Morning, everyone. Apologize, my video is not working. It will require me to log off and restart. So I figured I'd better just stay on for audio. Brad Peterson here, Director of Retail Fuels, Come and Go, and part of my role is overseeing the growth of EV and the charging infrastructure that we're putting in place.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. And just as a reminder for our audience, you're able to use the Whova chat feature to send in any questions. So if anything comes up as during our discussion, please feel free to ask that and we'll try to get it answered. But I think to start us off, if we could talk a little bit about the current infrastructure and how we got here. what do we know about how many EVs are out on the road in Iowa? What about the fast charging stations? And if there's any numbers that can kind of help us put that into context.
Yeah, so I can go ahead and take that one. As of June 2021, there were over 6,000 registered EVs on the road, and we currently have 40 DC fast charging stations, which adds up to 69 outlets. So you can use 69 cars at those stations. And they're mostly located along our interstates, so 35, 80, and 380, and then some on highways as well.
And as you know, how we got to this current state, I'm sorry, taking a step back, these charging stations, could we talk a little bit more about, how these charging stations work? What are the different charging stations? How long does it take to charge up a vehicle?
Yeah, absolutely. I can take that unless anyone else wants to. So there's 3 basic types, and really, we start with level 1, which is just your basic wall outlet, which is just a very, very slow trickle charge. We don't really recommend it for charging your electric vehicle, but if you have to, absolutely. Overnight should get you enough to get you to a station to charge up faster. And then there's a level 2 station, which takes about 2 to 4 hours to get the charge that you're looking for. And then there's a DC fast charger, which charges about 15 minutes will get you about 80% of your battery there.
And as we kind of look forward, so with this context in mind of the current demand, where do you all how do you see this demand changing in the coming years and coming decade? Is the infrastructure there to meet this demand, and how do we get there?
I can talk a little bit about how demand is growing in Iowa City and our downtown parking facilities. So we started offering electric vehicle charging in our parking facilities in April of 2017. And back then it was just a handful of people. By 2019, we were averaging 80 unique drivers per month. Obviously, we saw a dip in 2020. Demand for parking in general was down. I mean, the university was online only. Most people were working remotely from home. So our usage sunk to an average of about 60 unique drivers per month. But this year we saw amazing growth. We're beyond where we were pre-pandemic. We're seeing over 100 unique drivers on average per month utilizing our downtown stations.
And I don't know if any of the other panelists want to add kind of what we're maybe seeing on a state level, or Matt and Brad, if you also want to talk about those fast charging stations and if there's, the demand for that as the demand for electric vehicles seems to be growing. Oh, Matt, can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. Yeah, so MidAmerican right now has 21 DC fast chargers in operation. We have another 15 that we'll bring online by the end of this year. And then by the end of next year, we'll have 50 in operation throughout Iowa, throughout our entire service territory. We first started installing these towards the end of 2019. By the end of 2020, last year, we had 18 in service. And basically what we've seen since we've had those in service is a ramp up in usage throughout this year. So for example, in January of this year, we were looking just over 4,000 kilowatt hours over those 18 sites. And right now for those same 18 sites, you're looking around 13,000 kilowatt hours. So, the number of stations hasn't changed, but the usage is dramatically increased. So one of the things is just being able to get those stations out there for people to use. it's kind of the chicken or the egg thing is, you won't see market adoption of EVs in mass until people feel comfortable about being able to replace their current vehicles and travel how they currently do. But you're not able to do that unless you're able to charge throughout your driving, when you're going on trips. So I think as we get more fast charging infrastructure rolled out, you'll see adoption increase.
Brad, anything that you want to add about the work that Come and Go is doing with these fast charging
Yeah.
stations?
Yeah, so similar to Matt, we're obviously seeing increase in usage. As a whole, we operate in 11 states, and one of those states happens to be Colorado, which has a high demand for EV. So we are focusing most of our attention there just because the demand is much higher there, so we're getting a higher usage. But for the state of Iowa, we currently have 8 DC fast charging stations. We do have 5 level 2 stations as well. We give those for free, so we actually just track those, but we do give the level 2 charging for free. I can't remember who was talking earlier on. The DC is probably our future strategy as for Come and Go. Just we know that a typical fueling for a gas customer takes about 3 minutes, and we want to provide that convenience for our customers. So DC is, you can do it in about 15 to 28 minutes depending on the car and what their intake is for power. But we do have plans, as Matt mentioned. We're partnering with them as well here in the future. So we have 8 DC currently in the state of Iowa, but we have 12 that are either under construction or are in pre-construction phase that we'll have up and running, I would say, probably within the next 8 months, depending on the weather. And again, similar to what was stated earlier, we're focusing on high traffic corridor areas, so I-35, I-80, and or high highway intersections.
Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, Matt, you had mentioned kind of that chicken and the egg of what, how does that infrastructure meet that demand and vice versa. In your respective roles, how do you think this conversation should be managed? Do we focus on the infrastructure and meeting that demand, or do we wait for that demand and build that infrastructure along the way? How kind of help us understand that discussion?
Yeah, I think it goes hand in hand. I really do think the infrastructure piece has to be there first. It has, with that said, 80% of charging is done at home. So a majority of the travel currently is being done, doing your errands or going to work, and that won't change. You'll still see a majority of the charging being done at home overnight. But as adoption increases, you will see people traveling throughout the state, throughout the country, and needing that infrastructure in place. So it does go in hand. Once you get larger mass adoption of EVs in Iowa and the US, I think you'll see larger investments in the DC fast charging and in the infrastructure that is needed, maybe in some of the areas that maybe some of the more rural areas. So you'll probably see it again with the more urban areas, high traffic corridors, and then that will start to slowly make its way into the rural areas.
I'd just like to emphasize that point that I think it's there's a large education piece that's needed because, like Matt said, most of EV charging does occur at home, and most people can do most of their driving, their commuting, running errands, that kind of thing, strictly with home charging. But again, DC fast charging infrastructure is important to get to the next level of road trips and long distance travel.
Yeah, and talking a little bit about, that education piece and how do we use that education piece to make electric vehicles more accessible? What else needs to happen to make these vehicles more accessible to Iowans?
So I think a couple of things, definitely education, right? I think that there's a lot of people that still haven't, maybe they've seen an electric vehicle, but they don't know that it's an electric vehicle, and they haven't driven an electric vehicle, and they haven't plugged in an electric vehicle. And so kind of all of those things need to be able to come together for people to be comfortable making the switch, right? They need to know how to fuel it. They need to know how it drives. They need to know just how it feels so that they feel comfortable in making that switch. And then obviously the infrastructure build out, right? So like Matt said, yes, 80% of charging will happen at home, but if we really want to see the adoption, we're going to need to have infrastructure out there for people who don't have a garage and cannot have at-home charging, right? So multi-unit dwellings, we need to have a local level 2 charger that people can go and charge their vehicles there. And then a couple other things, I think that cities can update their residential and commercial building codes to include really having EV ready development. So laying the wiring and laying all that infrastructure underground when you're building the building to be able to install an electric vehicle charger there later, even if you're not planning on installing it while you develop that building, will just save a ton of time and money in the long run. And then another thing I think is really clarifying your policies related to EV charging. So clearly summarize the steps that businesses or residents or developers need to follow to install one of these EV charging stations. The permitting process really varies across the state right now. And so if we could get that streamlined and at least similar, that would be helpful, I think. Yeah, and then, really just looking at the funding opportunity. So when we think about, we know that electric vehicles have a lower total cost of ownership. So it's going to cost you less to fuel it. It's going to cost you less to perform, the maintenance. You're going to have a lot less maintenance on these vehicles. You get a big tax credit the first time you buy it. And some of the utilities will provide you with a rebate for buying an electric vehicle, right? But if you don't have that money up front, that doesn't really matter. So all of those benefits can't be really realized by a lot of people. So I think that changing that funding structure and making sure that the benefits are upfront as well would be really helpful.
And I think going off of that, a question from our audience is what incentives are in place for Iowans to make the switch to EV? Are there any incentives to make that switch?
Yeah, so obviously there's the federal tax credit. So depending on what vehicle you can get up to $7,500 back, I believe. And then Matt, do you want to talk a little bit about rebates?
Yeah, so MidAmerican has a $500 rebate for new vehicles that are purchased or leased. So as long as you're an Iowa customer in good standing with MidAmerican, you're eligible for that. We also offer our non-residential, so our commercial customers, the ability to take advantage of our $1,500 level 2 charging rebate. So we have a few rebates available. I believe some other utilities and entities. I've heard Metro Waste Authority also has started offering level 2 rebates as well. So there are different opportunities out there. And like MK said, there's the federal one. We've also seen proposed legislation that would remove some of the manufacturer caps, the 200,000 vehicles. So right now, manufacturers are able to provide that rebate, but the proposed legislation would get rid of that, actually increase the rebates, also make them available at the time of purchase. So there's a lot of things happening at the federal level right now that are very encouraging. And if they are passed, I think we'll probably see a larger adoption rate in Iowa and throughout the U.S.
Yeah, and as we kind of expect this larger adoption rate, another audience question is what type of charger makes the most sense for homeowners to install, I guess, practical wise and also financially?
So I can take that one. And so one of the things I don't know if we necessarily mentioned early on is when we think of electric vehicles, probably a lot of people think of the Tesla or maybe the Chevy Bolt, which are fully electric vehicles. There is no other fuel source, but there are plug-in hybrid electric vehicles. I drive a Chevy Volt, so it has a range of 50 miles on an electric battery and then switches over to gas. So there are two really main types of EVs, and depending on which one you have, I think probably plays a big part in which chargers that you would want to install at home. So for me, for a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, I think people can easily get by on a level 1 charger, which is just a standard 110, 120 volt outlet that everybody has or should have hopefully available to them. But if you want to charge at a faster rate, or you have a battery electric vehicle, so like a Tesla, you're probably going to want to invest in a level 2 charger, 240 volts. So just as an example, just kind of the charging rates for a Chevy Bolt. If you are and that's a fully electric vehicle, 66 kilowatt hour, 259 mile range. So if you're charging at a level 1, just a standard outlet, that would take you roughly 48 hours to go from completely from 0 to 100%. If you switch to a level 2 charger, you're looking at a full charge in 9.5 hours. And then DC fast charging is a little different. That's not something you would typically ever find at home, but at gas stations and place of that nature, you're looking, depending, it could take you 1.2 hours, but a lot of people are probably going to just charge that 80% rate. So it's going to be that 20 to 40 minutes, just depending on the vehicle's capabilities.
Yeah, Daniel, I know that you're an electric vehicle user as well. I'm not sure if there's anything that you want to add kind of about that charging from home aspect of it.
No, I'm in complete agreement with Matt. I personally drive a plug-in hybrid. It's a Prius Prime. My wife drives a Tesla Model 3. But I'm in complete agreement that with a battery electric, full electric, you definitely want to invest in that level 2 charger if that's available to you within your means. With a plug-in hybrid, you can definitely get by with level 1. But it does help to have level 2 if you're taking multiple trips in a day and want to go all electric and not start up that gas engine.
Yeah, and kind of, I guess, taking a step back and looking at it from a broader perspective, when it comes to expanding the infrastructure in Iowa, is there a plan for how much charging is needed? Or we kind of talked a little bit about how many chargers there are currently. Is there an ideal number to really make this infrastructure more accessible?
So as part of the Eastern Iowa Electric Vehicle Readiness Plan, a consultant team came in and looked at existing conditions, what infrastructure we have now, and they brought in some numbers from other communities, and they have found that to promote widespread EV adoption, they have found that 450 EV chargers per million population is kind of the magic number to get widespread adoption. And Iowa City is getting pretty close when you adjust for the population. We're at the time that the study was written, we were at 386 plugs per million population. And I know that more chargers have come online since then. So Iowa City is getting close to that magic number.
That's really awesome. And then just statewide, there's definitely not, an organized plan or a number, but I definitely see that analysis, like Daniel was just talking about, is definitely needed.
And when it comes to these fast charging stations, Brad and Matt, what would be helpful, either on a state level or a federal level to, make it easier to install these chargers to really build up that network?
Yeah, Matt, I don't know, I can go first.
Yeah.
I'll be honest, I think it's, I don't know if it's public knowledge or not, but I think Matt mentioned it earlier, the infrastructure for the fast charging it's not cheap. I don't know why someone would install that for their house, especially if they're going to be parked there for hours. You might as well take advantage of a level 1 or level 2. But this comes back to the chicken or egg question, right? That's the demand is not there for us in the convenience store industry. So to spend that much capital up front to install the infrastructure, it financially it doesn't make sense right now for us. But through our analysis, we see EV coming, and we want to be there for all customers, whether they're an internal combustion engine or a battery EV vehicle. And so we are taking advantage of MidAmerican's program, as well as state grant programs. The federal infrastructure plan hopefully will be coming through soon. And what we're hearing is that will be passed down to the state level, where states will then determine where that funding is getting dispersed. But for come and go right now, we are taking advantage of any grants or any utility companies like MidAmerican and partnering with them on where we'll place the DC fast chargers.
Yeah, and to add on to that, I think Brad, we probably agree. I mean, the level of investment, I mean, you're talking, 200, 300,000 per site for two DC fast chargers. That kind of investment is obviously not cheap, and like you mentioned, Brad, the low adoption rates means that the return, it really just is not there. So it doesn't make financial sense for companies to make that investment. So I think seeing a federal or state kind of funding is really going to play a large part in the near future, I guess, of rolling out the infrastructure throughout the state.
And I should add it on. We are doing what we can. What I mean by that is any new stores that we are building, and this is across our footprint, we are planning. We're putting conduit underneath concrete, knowing where we'll place EV chargers when the time comes for that store. If we're not opening with chargers, just because it saves a lot of money to not tear up concrete. Little things like that we're trying to adapt to and plan for in preparation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Matt and Brad, both of you mentioned kind of those potential solutions of more grant funding, as well as some legislation on the federal level. But when it comes to sort of support, either for vehicle owners or companies who are installing these vehicles, anything else to add about what would be helpful or what is still needed?
I think it's really going. I mean, outside of federal funding for it, I think it's really just market adoption of EVs is really what's going to end up driving things at the end of the day. There are a lot of challenges to get around. Just as MidAmerican's deployed in my short time on this program, some of the challenges that we're facing just installing these is a lot of sites aren't ready for DC fast charging. A lot of the transformers that are to serve these aren't the same service size as what is serving the convenience stores. So we're having to put in a brand new transformer, which takes up considerable amount of space, as well as the charging equipment itself, the power cabinets, the meters, and other components that go along, that you might not see or think about when you're thinking about fast chargers. Not, unfortunately, not something that can just pick up and put down. It does take considerable amount of planning and coordination to roll these out, and you'll see that especially some of the older, let's say, gas stations, things like that, where there might not be a lot of green space. That you're going to see additional challenges is there. So there's just beyond the financial piece of it, there are a lot of things that make it tough to add this infrastructure into existing. So it's good to hear, Brad mentioning that, they're kind of thinking about that and planning for the future.
Yeah, agree with Matt's comments there. Number one, right, is just the financial aid, whether that's through the federal, state, or utility. The other piece is he mentioned is the adoption, the demand, right? So I truly believe once these OEMs start producing at a higher level, the Ford, the GMs, this will drive down price, and data shows adoption will keep increasing. So we're anxious for the new vehicles to be coming out as well.
Yeah, and Danielle, you had mentioned a little bit about the work that Iowa City is doing, and MK, I'm hoping you can jump in as well. But what is important for communities and local governments across the state to keep in mind as they're trying to increase the use of electric vehicles in their communities?
So a large piece that Iowa City is trying to do is to set a good example. That was one of the actions that was outlined in the electric vehicle readiness plan. And so the city of Iowa City has been trying to set a good example by electrifying our own fleet. And it's not just the light duty vehicles, passenger cars, it's heavy duty vehicles as well. We are working to electrify our transit fleet. In fact, we are going to start accepting delivery of 4 fully electric transit buses this month or early next month. And we've been working with MidAmerican closely to get the DC fast chargers for those installed and up and running. That's a large project, as I'm sure Matt's aware. But yeah, just setting a good example and making sure that we are educating the community as well.
Yeah, and then I think a couple of things. So again, just clarifying the policies related to EV charging. So, a clear summary of the basic steps and permits that are going to be needed to install electric vehicle charging infrastructure. Establishing wayfinding signage and guidance for that so that people can find these chargers. Establishing and enforcing EV parking rules, so making sure that ICE vehicles aren't parked in EV only and EV charging parking spaces, and allowing for right-of-way locations for EV charging installations is going to be a big one. So like when you see cars parked along the side of the street by the curb or by where you have to pay to park there, allowing for chargers to be there would be very, very helpful. And then really explicitly integrating EVs and EV infrastructure into your planning process. So, when you're redoing the multifamily units and the commercial building codes, making sure that you require those EV ready developments, but then also making sure that as part of your design review for capital projects, and when you do like your long-term transportation plan or your any sort of long-term master plan, just making sure that you include EVs in that is really going to be important. Being able to financially support charging station installations would be great if you can do that. Yeah, that's what I would say is the most important.
Yeah, it seems like that planning for the future in these different aspects is something that is really important to keep in mind. I guess to go off of that, how, any advice for communities on how to plan for the future? MK, you mentioned planning for those housing developments, but anything else to kind of help communities be forward thinking about this and really plan for that infrastructure, since it does seem to be challenging to implement it in current infrastructure?
Yeah, Daniel, do you have anything to
I guess some things that you already touched on was building codes. That was another thing that was identified in the readiness plan, updating building codes to include for, if not the charger themselves, but make them EV ready. As was already alluded to, it's so much cheaper to install an EV if you already have the conduit run or even the wiring, rather than trying to retrofit after the fact. And we're actually soon are going to look at some potential rebate programs to help folks install that infrastructure in their homes. And that would help speed adoption. Maybe if that current homeowner doesn't get an EV right away, maybe the next homeowner will look at that home and think, well, it's already ready and I have an EV, so I'm gonna go for this home over a different one. So.
And Daniel, you mentioned those electric transit buses. I was also hoping you could talk a little bit more about what's important to keep in mind as Iowa City is moving toward, is looking to add this electric fleet, as well as just kind of what's important to keep in mind as that transition is happening.
A cool thing about those electric buses is that they're super quiet, comfortable, and smooth. We have the opportunity in the spring to look at one and ride on it and drive it a little bit. And I think it's going to elevate the level of service that we provide our transit customers, because it is a much better ride than they might be used to on the old diesel buses.
Matt and Brad, are as companies are looking toward moving to an electric fleet, anything either of you have to add about kind of that transition, or anything that your companies are doing in regards to that transition?
I can start there. I think, and it kind of depends on the size of the fleet, and really just planning for what that additional load is going to be. So if companies have a large fleet, let's say it's a delivery service or something like that, those are things you're probably going to want to engage MidAmerican on early to make sure that we have the available electric service capability. And if not, we have enough time to improve our infrastructure to meet those new demands that customers may be requiring.
Yeah, nothing additional out there. Obviously, if we had heavier vehicles or quantity, we'd partner with utility company for just ensuring we have enough power. Other than that, no, there's not much to add on. I mean, we have an energy manager in-house that obviously monitors, demand charges, and just trying to work on, different ways that we can provide EV power. There are chargers out there. We're actually going to be installing, it's with a company in Cedar Rapids. We're going to be installing what's called FreeWire. I don't know if anyone's heard of that organization, but actually battery stored a charger. So it'll be the first one that we'll put in place for not just in the state of Iowa for us, but in the organization. So we're hoping to have that probably spring of 22. So we're excited for that to go live. But yeah, nothing else to add on from what Matt stated. Agree with him.
And I guess I would say planning is obviously important. You need to plan to make sure, where those vehicles are going to be going, how they're going to be charging, and just that you have the right equipment ready for it. But then also training is a really big component. So a lot of the medium and heavy duty electric vehicles have regenerative braking, excuse me. And it's important to train your drivers on how to use that. And then also, just as Daniel said, it's a lot different of a drive, right? So it's a lot quieter. So that definitely requires training as well. And then training of your mechanics. So making sure that they know how to take care of these vehicles if and when it does need some maintenance.
Yeah, it seems to go back to that education piece that we were talking about earlier, and continuing to educate about these different features of the vehicles. We talked a little bit about homeowners charging, as well as this, the infrastructure along the interstate. But an audience question is, how do we get businesses or shopping areas to install these electric chargers? What does that conversation look like?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think businesses, typically when they're installing, they think about it as an amenity for their workers, right? So as workplace charging. But if we want to think about it for public use, I think that really showing the demand in your area and how that company and specific business could benefit from installing these is going to be important. And just showing that there is customer interest in having them there. I think that a lot of times people are like, my customers won't use that. I don't think it's there yet. But if you have the interest, business owners are always trying to work with their customers and provide the best service for their customers. So I think that just letting them know that there's the interest could be very valuable too.
Yeah, and we've talked about that demand, how it's going to increase, but it might not be there currently for, that incentive for those fast chargers. So kind of in a timeline, how far away are we from that increase in demand?
I think we're really close. So every major automaker has announced that they will only be making light duty vehicles as an EV model within the next decade or decade and a half. So we are rapidly approaching that. And as we get closer and closer to that, the used EV market is going to be increasing. So I say that the demand is here, and it's only going to keep increasing from here.
And looking at parts of the state, Daniel, you talked a little bit about Iowa City's experience and work on this. I was wondering if any of you have anything to add about other areas of the state and kind of what we're seeing, as well as increasing accessibility and infrastructure to the more of the rural areas of the state too, and where that falls into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, from MidAmerican's perspective, when we rolled our program out, we obviously wanted to hit those major travel corridors. But the other piece of our focus was the rural areas of our service territory, realizing, again, those are probably going to be the last places to see any type of major capital funding for DC fast charging. So we want to make sure that we covered all areas of our service territory. So when we set up our program, the way we looked at it is trying to spread these chargers out so that there's about 50 miles in between each location. So that way, as you're traveling, you have different options available depending on which way you're going. It's not just the major travel corridors. So, obviously we're seeing the adoption in the major urban areas, with Polk County having a large amount of adoption. But I think, as MK mentioned, as more vehicles are rolled out, as the manufacturers are only providing that electric option, I think we'll see greater rollout in the rural areas as well. So, that need is going to be there. And so hopefully, we'll be in a position to provide for that need as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to a little bit more outside of Iowa if there's any interest. Yeah, I think it was Daniel that talked about needing, cities or counties to update their building codes. Just in Denver, for example, where there's high EV adoption, if you built any new retail establishment at a certain square footage, it's a requirement to add EV. So when we're building new stores in Denver, we have to have a minimum of 2 chargers at a 50 kilowatt. So I see that it'll eventually grow over into Midwest and Iowa. I just don't know what time frame that looks like, but that will help increase infrastructure and then lead into adoption.
And speaking of adoption, just to jump in here briefly, the EV readiness plan study quoted the Iowa DOT that the EV market in Iowa is expected to reach 450,000 EVs in 2040 based on a medium adoption scenario. So it's, as MK said, it's about to pick up big time.
And we talked a little bit about that education piece of it. And just as a reminder to our audience, if there's any other questions that you have, please feel free to send those in. But I was hoping that each of you could kind of talk about that education piece of how do you work to get this information out? What does that education process look like? And kind of talking a little bit more about that process.
Yeah, so I can start. So our biggest education piece on EVs is definitely at the All Iowa Auto Show. We host what we call the electric vehicle exhibit there. And basically it's the only place on the floor where there's no dealership representatives around, and there's just all of the electric vehicle models in Iowa there for people to look at and see and touch, and depending on the year, have a test drive in it. And just, we staff it with volunteers and EV drivers, and just let people come and ask their questions and not feel pressured like they have to buy it or anything, but just ask their EV questions and get those answered. And then we also usually have charging station demos, so you can really take the card and unlock the charging station and pull it out and see what that what it looks like and how you would plug it into the vehicle. And then we also do webinars and similar events year round,
And something that the City of Iowa City recently completed as part of the education piece was participation in the National Drive Electric Week. We rolled that into our Climate Fest, and National Drive Electric Week is a great opportunity for people to interact with people who currently own and drive electric vehicles. And so you're getting, their one-on-one experience of how that vehicle works for them, how it works in their life. So anyone that's interested, I would encourage to visit one of those events. National Drive Electric Week is the last week of September usually, so look out for that next year. There's also plenty of online resources such as Plug-in America at pluginamerica.org, or the Electric Auto Association at electricauto.org.
For MidAmerica, seeking out opportunities to speak, such as this one, or attending events like the Iowa City had put on. They had a car show and had different owners there to give their experience and to show their vehicles, kind of similar to what MK was saying. So just really just being available when customers or companies call in or email, and just being willing to speak and go through and answer questions, because it is a large learning curve. There's a lot of different models, different charging rates. It's different than what people are accustomed to. It's not just pulling up to a gas pump and filling up, and 3 minutes later pulling away. each vehicle's a little different, or each, DC fast charger is different, or, there's obviously the different levels of, level 1, level 2. So there is a large education aspect to it. So just being available to answer those questions is I think really important.
For us at ComeGo, it's similar to what the other three stated. The only thing that we do maybe outside of what's been shared is we'll do not at every charging site, call it grand opening, but usually in a new location. So for example, in Ames, Iowa, we partner with the city of Ames, and we installed 2 fast chargers at one of our sites, and we held a pretty big event. We had about 18 different EV type of vehicles, from Tesla, the Ford Mach-E. We didn't get a truck, tried, but we had all different types of vehicles, and it's actually a big showing. So obviously the early adopters or people who are interested showed up, and to Matt's point, every vehicle is different to where they plug in their vehicle. Most people are used to one side or the other to put in the gas nozzle. It seems about like every different vehicle now has a different location to charge. So there is a big education needed across both customers and users. So I think this will continue to evolve.
MK, going back to the Iowa Auto Show, someone from our audience is wondering when is the Iowa Auto Show, and where they can go for more information.
Great questions. I hope to see you there. It'll be in March this year, and you can go to Google and Google All Iowa Auto Show.
Sounds easy enough. We've talked about the challenges. We've talked about the demand, how it's almost there. And, on a forward thinking note, what for each of you is kind of most exciting about this conversation, and that this demand is almost there, that this infrastructure is being worked on?
I think just the progress, honestly. I started this position in 2018, and I lived in Minnesota before that. And there was 1 DC fast charging station when I first started, and now there's 40. So just in the last few years, there's been incredible growth, and I'm just really excited to see where that goes.
Yep, similar to MK. When I bought my vehicle, is similar. Was trying to figure out, was it Tesla or something different, just because the charging capabilities weren't there, and it's really accelerated in the last few years. So I'm interested to see, the path forward as an EV driver. I think they're very exciting to drive, a very different experience. So I'm excited to hopefully see, my neighbors and customers find a similar experience and enjoyment.
For myself, same. Such a new, although it's technically not a new segment, it's evolving. Seems like something's changing every day. So excited just to see the path and the technology advancements and where it goes. It's going to continue to change, and obviously for the better.
And just to build off of what the other panelists have said, what excites me most is to see at least our usage in Iowa City going way up, in the wide variety of models of different vehicles out there. Just the other day, I was walking by one of our downtown charging stations and saw a Jeep Wrangler 4xe plug-in hybrid plugged in and charging at one of our charging stations. And I was a little surprised because I knew that Jeep was talking about rolling those out, but I didn't know they were even available yet. So that's really cool to see, different model out there. But I'm really encouraged to see the usage go up to the point where we're actually looking at expanding our charging offerings and putting more stations in our parking facilities.
Yeah, and as this conversation and this infrastructure rollout is continuing to happen over the next handful of years and decade, how can attendees learn more or stay up to date with the work that is happening? We talked about that education piece, but any other resources available or websites or newsletters or anything that people can stay in the conversation with?
So Clean Cities has a newsletter. You can go to iowaeda.com and find the energy office and then find Clean Cities, or hopefully just Google Iowa Clean Cities and you'll find our newsletter link. But then also the Alternative Fuels Data Center has a really great station locator. So if you go to afdc.com, I think it's .com. That might be wrong. But then go to locate stations. It can show you all of the DC fast charging stations in Iowa, as well as all of the level 2s. And you can filter it out by, if you want to include the Tesla stations or if you don't want to include the Tesla stations. And that's just fun to go look and see the growth every once in a while on there.
Yeah, a great resource that I would like to plug is plugshare.org. And you can do exactly what MK was saying and filter out different connector types, level 2 versus DC fast charging. But I would recommend anyone who's thinking about making the switch and getting an electric vehicle, go there first, because you might not know the charging options that are right around the corner from you. If you already are an electric vehicle driver, you kind of know where the charging opportunities are near your common destinations and that fit your driving patterns. But if you don't have one yet, you might not know that just right around the block, there's a level 2 station I can plug in, and or if I take this route to visit parents, there might be a DC fast charger that you weren't aware of at a gas station, maybe across the street from the gas station that you normally visit. So there are a lot more options out there than people might even realize. So if you're thinking at all about making the switch, go to that website and check out what is available near you.
Yeah, MidAmerican has a website that lists our available rebates. So would direct our customers to our website under delivering energy. We also have a link to our DC fast charging network that kind of shows which ones are available. Obviously, PlugShare shows all throughout the state. That's in addition to ours, but ours show what we have built and what areas that we are looking to build. I know our customers are looking at it, because in going to some of these car shows, I've had customers come up to me and they know almost more than I do as far as what the progress is being made at the locations that are being built. So I know there's a lot of interest in it, especially obviously the early adopters are very interested in it. So anyway, I'd recommend going out to our website, as well as feel free to contact us, contact me via phone or email. Happy to answer questions, even if it's related to electric vehicles and not necessarily your electric service. So happy to answer any questions that our customers or anybody may have.
For come and go, it's already been mentioned. We utilize PlugShare as well. That's a good site. We have a couple consulting organizations we work with as well. But what I would recommend is, I think it was Matt mentioned it earlier, he was deciding between a Tesla or a different EV vehicle. Just go to a dealership, Ford, GM. Tesla has a sales office in Des Moines. I know they have one in Chicago as well. And just talk to them. And if they have vehicles in there, it might not, but if they do, you can, get in it. But I think you can learn a lot just by talking to someone in person and seeing the vehicle.
Yeah, we just have a couple minutes left, and I wanted to see if there's any last final thoughts from our panelists on this discussion as we're wrapping up.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. I'm excited that these conversations continue to happen, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'd
Thank-
echo MK's same sentiments. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thank you for to the Gazette for hosting this, and thank you for to everyone who listened to this.
Yeah, thank you so much, MK, Matt, Brad, and Daniel for being involved in this discussion, for the work you're doing. For attendees, if you're planning on staying on the infrastructure track, the next session is safeguarding critical infrastructure. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us this morning, and thank you for such a great discussion.
Thank you.